Hello Louis, welcome to your feedback video for digital concept visualization. The aim here is to give you some video feedback on the portfolio of pieces that you submitted recently for the module. The following material is private to you via the link I have provided, however you can share this if you choose to, but just be careful where you put the link. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Photoshop, and basically what I'm going to do is go through your work one piece at a time and basically leave some comments. Hopefully you find some of these feedback points useful as a way of building your practice in the future. So essentially what I'll do is I'll start with the character design, then we'll move on to the vehicle, then we'll move on to the environment. So without hanging around too long, I'll just get started, okay? So getting with the character, let's talk about the ideas and the design first. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here just so we can see. And what we have here is the Lurker concept sheet for this mindless people that were born on a satanic cult and kept locked up since an early age in the underground dungeon. Really dark, gritty stuff, which is really quite cool. And I believe last time I talked to you, this character was somebody that was used to kind of head out there and capture these people. So the idea is that they're designed to blend in, but you know, whenever that cloak comes off, they're actually pretty hideous looking people. So I think the idea is, well, it's really cool, but it's also like gives you a lot of really kind of beautiful imagery, dark imagery to play around with. So the overall design I think we got here is somebody who's designed to maybe not stand out in a crowd, which I think it's going to be hard to do when you look like this anyway. But we'll stick with the we'll suspend our disbelief for now, and we'll talk about the actual figure itself. So I think some nice ideas. The hooded character and the mask I think is a really nice idea. I think it's a little bit unclear here what's going on, and I think maybe I would have tilted the head a little further towards the camera just a little bit, just so we can see in there a bit further. I think the cloak idea is cool. I probably would have had that drape maybe just a little bit more than what you've done here, just to kind of give some really nice shapes, and maybe that hood kind of dripping just a little bit more, but nothing major there. And of course we've got the other clothes features which are sort of stuck out here. I would maybe have played around with those a little bit more. They're a nice feature, but I think tonally they're kind of very similar to the hood. I might have separated those out just a little bit further, but ultimately I like the way we can see underneath that there's hints of something else going on here that are really nice, as you've kind of provided here. So nice idea. Maybe the sandals don't work so well, but again I think that's just a sort of nitpicking point. I wouldn't worry about those too much. And heading over to the pose figure, we can see obviously when they're declad they're even more scary looking, so good to see you've got an incredible imagination. There's something not quite right about that back and the sort of chest area. I think maybe that should have been more lurched. I think there's just something going on with the spine in general there that's not kind of worked out too well. Maybe just a little bit more ref to figure those more difficult points out. But regardless, I think the design kind of largely works. So if we talk about the line work, we can see it's pretty clear. Some issues of confidence I can see in some parts of the line work, but largely you communicate pretty well. And the perspective, let's talk about the anatomical forms next. So we always started on the anatomical forms, sorry. I sometimes trip up on my words over here. But I think largely the figure looks correct, other than if we zoom in we can start to see some misplacencies in the detail. I think largely we can see that there's a sort of discrepancy between these two knees, especially in this area where it kind of the illusion falls apart a little bit, and of course the feet probably need more attention. But just moving on from those, we'll talk about the shading and rendering. Largely it's quite appropriate to the style you've chosen. It's dark, it's gritty, it's grimy, and I think pretty appropriate. Areas of it can look a little bit flat than they are, but I can see here you've added like lighting effects and clothes folds which look pretty effective. The texture of this cloth and stains of blood looks pretty effective. So I think largely the problems come down to shapes and forms, and if you manage to get those correct, then you're on your way to kind of really pushing your design forward. So good job. I'll move on to the Mad Max style bus, which is cool because I love Mad Max, and so no bonus points for that though. But it's a pretty effective design. I think I would like to have seen maybe just some pull out, some detailed areas. I think the actual sheet is pretty underutilized in general compared to the previous sheet, where we can see, well, you have got some, you know, maybe too much texture going on. It's still pretty effective, Also kind of wanted to point out, I think that writing's pretty unreadable in general, and I would maybe try not to have those those dark outlines so much. There's no real need for that. But in this front, we see the bus here it's pretty blocky, and I think there are some issues with some of the forms, but I think with one more pass you could probably solve a lot of those problems. The bus itself, we can see there's some perspective issues in here, that they're not quite consistent. For instance, up here is pretty much the same as up here. Well, that should be a little bit thinner. We can see that those are diverging a little bit in terms of shape. And I would probably have spent more time thinking about all types of cool things and that could happen in this space up here, especially whether it was rags or boxes or things that were just used to stack and carry weapons, or I think it's just an opportunity that's been missed. So in terms of design, you've got some nice ideas happening here. The shadow is pretty strange. I think it's always best to stick with an actual standard shadow rather than a blurry one, something that captures the bus more accurately. But again, those are things that are fixable, and just other little features and you just need to pay more attention to when it comes to those perspective drawings in the future. So it's a good job overall. Shading's a little bit heavy, maybe we'll lighten that up a bit just so we can see the line work in there. I think my final point on this is actually the line work's all pretty much the same consistent thickness, where I think you can actually, if you try to alternate between sort of thick and thin lines, you can really you can have a lot of difference in there in terms of weight. But moving on to the perspective environment, of course, this is far better than the last time I saw it. It's actually a bit more original looking. I think it definitely feels like a temple area. We can feel that light coming in there, so we've worked on this pretty hard. I think some of the actual shapes in here are still a bit basic and there's some detail missing. I would love to see you fill this up a bit more with elements of graphic design, dress setting. So I can see that there's elements of candles in here, but I cannot see the candles. Which I think is a pretty strange decision. So it's about making sure that you dress set a scene properly so that you can actually see all those delicious details. Just like little things to miss out on are the thickness of walls, for instance, making sure that you don't miss easy to miss things. So I think just a bit longer on this, and maybe something interesting on the roof. The roof's pretty it's a big flat area. If you think about how this looks on page, it's just a giant flat triangle really, and I think again you can do interesting things there with some sort of graphic design element or things that are related to the scene that you're drawing, such as all types of imagery and murals. And you've got this mural over here, but I would have maybe drawn something in there that was a bit gothic and gory. And of course these graphic design banners here, there's something cool could have happened. Just to kind of lift this scene up a little bit more. So in summary, I think again, like yourself and many of your colleagues, you are not short on ideas. Your design skills are growing and developing. If you look what you've achieved on these 3 pages alone, there's actually a huge step forward there. But I think there is a requirement to be braver, to step forward even more, to kind of think about the detail and dress setting, to think about varying your line thickness a bit more, and trying to get away from as many straight lines as you're using. A straight line that you see here and here are always great opportunities to create something more interesting, to break it up and do something cool with it. All in all though, it's a really good effort, and I really I'll thank you for your submission, and I'll leave you to it. I'll catch you on the other side of all of this, and thanks again. Good night.